Hello everyone, a very good afternoon. So today, if you see the schedule, we have the topics listed as NPA and NPM. There has been significant amount of discussion which I have already carried out on the NPA aspect, right? So we'll be breezing through the NPA and then we'll be looking somewhat in details the Minobrook 3 and the Blacksburg, the idea of the Blacksburg Manifesto, right? And post that we'll be getting into the NPM, okay? So that is the broader, idea that I wanted to convey at the start. Just like every session, when we talk about, we'll be looking at PYQs. I will not be going through the goals, anti-goals of NPA. I mean, those things are pretty basic and you know that. Like every session, we'll be focusing more on analysis, interlinkages, etc. Okay, so I hope we all are in agreement of this, right? So let us first have a look at certain previous year's questions for the NPA, and in conjunction we'll be looking at NPM as well. So the question is pretty simple and you will find that a common strand, a common DNA actually runs through. So the question says, NPA has seriously jolted the traditional concepts and outlook of the discipline and enriched the subject by imparting a wider perspective, linking it closely with the society. Okay, this was asked in 2016 and they have quoted this statement by Negro and Negro. Alright, now the idea is fairly simple. The difference between the traditional public administration and the new public administration. Right? If you remember, while dealing with the CPA, we talked about old CPA and the new CPA. Similar is the case here. So we should know the strands of difference because inside it lies a question and its answer, why NPA was brought out altogether. It is all, everything okay, that you had the Philadelphia conference, Minobrook conference, you know the details. Okay, honey report, this thing, that thing, that's fine. But the point is, you will have to get into the substance in terms of how and why this particular aspect was brought about. This was in 2016. Interestingly, 2017, they asked NPM. In 2018, they get back to the NPA. And they say that the phenomenological approach advocated by NPA has obstructed the path of theory building. Now, a lot of you would get confused by the word phenomenological approach. You will find these aspects there in the examination. Every alternate year or so, probably every year, you will find a word or two which are completely ununderstandable. Right? Not all of us might have that rich vocabulary, etc. Now please understand that this is something which is not new. Okay, if it is talking about NPA, it must be something related to NPA, that is first. Okay, second, those of you, because the paper actually comes in English and Hindi both. Those of you who are well versed with Hindi, for folks who actually belong to other vernacular languages, are somewhat disadvantaged. But the point is that if you do not get a meaning in English, at least you can see the Hindi question. Right? Apart from that also, you will, even if let us say I take it as an idea that I do not know what a phenomenological approach means. But I have to see in and around the question, what is before and what is after. Advocated by the NPA, that means something which is advocated by the NPA, I do not know what phenomenological approach is. Okay, has obstructed the path of theory building in public administration. Theory building, universalization was a trait of what? CMT, SMT, something that, or even the behavioralist, something that existed in the pre-NPA era. Okay. That means NPA has something which is this phenomenological approach which is obstructing the path of theory building. That means universalization. Okay, that means it is looking at far more ecology, social cultural dimensions, wider perspective, just like we saw in the previous question. Now it is the same cocktail of those ingredients. I hope now you understand what I mean. The DNA is the same. It is the way it is being asked again and again that is being changed. So even if I do not know what phenomenological approach is, I need not panic. I should actually reflect, okay, I know NPA well. Alright. Then comes new public management, new public management, new public management everywhere. If you look at the true blue questions of the NPA, these were the questions which were asked. But in our discussions over globalization and other matters, we have frequently referred to the NPA aspect. Okay, so let us, visit the NPA again and see, because for quite many years, things have not been asked from the NPA. So we should have a good grip on this topic, because NPM is the flavor of the season. NPM is something which is more contemporary, and NPM is changing. NPM is something which is there today itself. I mean, if we see, it is well in operation. Okay, but we need to see this. If you see the background of the NPA, that is New Public Administration, there was a crisis, and public administration as a discipline is not new to crisis. We have seen crisis unfolding, multiple times when it comes to the discipline of public administration. So these period of 1960s, 70s was a period which was marked by a great many crises in terms of instability and confusion that was prevailing in the West. And if we see the present era or the modern era, the West has been the cradle of public administration, where largely the theoretical development which has happened in West. Okay, and it was, shaking. So Waldo, one of the principal scholars of the new era, because it was an era which was changing, and the new scholars, the new breed of scholars of public administration were at odds with the classical idea. So jostling was going on. And Waldo actually, in an article mentioned as Public Administration in the Time of Turbulence, reflected on the aspects of public administration. And he basically deduced in his article that the way public administration is running, the way it is there, both as a discipline. Remember, NPA is looking at both the theoretical as well as the practical perspectives. both as a discipline as well as an activity, it is not able to respond to the present day challenges. Okay, the title itself was Public Administration in a Time of Turbulence. Okay, even Golembowski, our very own Golembowski, mentions this period as a period of war in public administration. And therefore, the young scholars actually sat down and they talked about that, okay, this is something which is troubling, and the idea, because you see, while Waldo is writing in 1971, it is the product of his discussions, his deductions, his interactions. And in 1968, going 3 years backward, a conference was held, which we all know as Minnowbrook 1. Which we all know as Minnowbrook 1. And this is one of the most important aspect. Herein, the scholar said that the old public administration actually gave importance to administration. And there was a need of a new kind of public administration which should give importance to the public. The old public administration actually emphasized on principles, processes, procedures, whereas the new public administration emphasized on value, philosophy, efficiency, effectiveness. Efficiency, effectiveness. Okay? So, I beg your pardon, efficiency and effectiveness will come here in OPA. The value and the philosophy like public service delivery, service efficiency, etc. So, in a way, NPA challenged what were the then established notions of public administration. Right? There were a lot of parallel things which were happening. For example, the American involvement in the Vietnam War, 70s, you also see the oil crisis, etc. And all of them actually contributed to this chaos. Because remember, always the basics. The basics is that there is a state, which is the agent, and the society, which is the principal. As long as the state is able to fulfill the demands, aspirations, satisfy the needs of the society, it's fine. The moment the state is unable to do so, then the working of the state comes into question. And that was the tiredness of the OPA, the old public administration, that was getting reflected. Like I said, there were multiple reports, Honey report on education, which came, right? And then the Philadelphia Conference again, 1967, both in 1967. I am not getting into the conferences as such, right? Because that is something that you already know. Okay? But this gave rise to and ultimately cut the chase to what are the cardinal features of NPA. And through features, we will see how it differs from the OPA. So these features have been very aptly given by Fredrickson. George Fredrickson. Okay. He points out that social equity is at the heart of this NP. So, social equity. Simultaneously keep telling me, what did old NPA emphasized? Hanji, what did old NPA emphasized? No, that is what I told. Tell me something corresponding to this. तभी तो learning होगी ना. The new NPA actually is looking at social equity. Organizational working. Yes, that is there. That is there. Organizational working, etc. That is all there. But still, you see, the traditional public administration or the old public administration was not so much value led. So while equity, ethics padhte na hum sab, we all study ethics. Equity is a very important value. There it was not that kind of a value. There the cardinal values were only efficiency and effectiveness, even at the cost of equity. So you should know this part, interpret this part. Okay? Also, नहीं, ऐसा नहीं है. Effectiveness, efficiency, economy has always been there. That is why it is said about NPA that it started no paradigm of its own. That is why the second question which I took, the phenomenological approach actually did not contribute or rather hampered the theory building, because it is not saying, NPA is not saying that you sacrifice efficiency and effectiveness. Please understand, it is saying that the way you are looking at effectiveness, efficiency, etc., that is not correct. You are looking at it from a very mechanistic, parochial, inward looking point of view. You should look at it from the societal point of view, where the yardsticks of your efficiency and effectiveness should be efficient public service delivery, satisfaction of population. So this is an orientation shift. You are not changing the cardinal principle of effectiveness. You are merely broadening it, giving it a new dimension. Every theory from Taylor onwards, from Wilson onwards, to postmodernism, to post-Weberianism, to good governance, does anybody say that you should not carry effectiveness and efficiency? Even in good governance, we talk about efficiency and effectiveness. Nobody is saying that. It is the orientation with which you are looking at efficiency and effectiveness that has changed. Okay? Also, the era for a new inquiry into public administration begins. Because the traditional devices, the traditional methods were not giving appropriate result. Therefore, the old public administration was what? Rigid. Hence, here flexibility was advocated. Remember, it does not mean that we sacrifice rationality. The rationality is very much a part of the NPA. Rather, it talks about arriving at that rationality with a broader orientation. For example, the administrator ought to interact with the people. What needs to be done and by whom. So the seeds, if we can say, of the democratic form of administration in theory and in profession. Because before this, Administration was being looked at from an inward orientation. The seeds of the democratic form of administration, which we see taking zenith, during governance, good governance, where principles like democratic decentralization, stakeholdership, a networked approach to governance to bring about public interest is brought about. The seeds were sown here. So you see, the change begins from within. NPA is emphasizing upon decentralization of authority, recommending that the traditional ivory tower approach, which was there, the hierarchical approach, that is to be done away with. And we need to be, like I said, flexible and dynamic. And this cannot be cast in stone. You have to continuously review it. In response to what?
The new changing in society.
Environment. In a word, I mean environment. Obviously, the society and all. So now you see, the perspective that I want you to carry is from Wilson. When Wilson was theorizing, Wilson was actually also looking at the then problems in American public administration. So when we say that public administration is an ecological discipline, that is true. But the casting of ecology into the formal bylanes of public administration happens at NPA. Because as a part of the theory, it is saying that you should be sensitive to the environment. Also, NPA talks about the human relations approach. So the human relations approach that you see in organizational management, human relations theory, that actually gets institutionalized as part of the NPA, where morale, motivation, productivity is being talked about in relation to all those things. Okay?
Waldo criticized Simon. Waldo was a critic of Simon. So how he is embracing human relations?
Simon was a human relationist.
He was behavioralist, but behavioralist is found on foundations of authority.
So, Waldo criticizes Simon based on what? Tell me the criticism. Deduce it, no?
Scientificism.
Because Simon, while making his decision-making theory, is reflecting more on the scientific aspects. Later, of course, Simon corrects himself. Right? So, Waldo is criticizing that aspect. It is the same phenomenological approach that Waldo is using to criticize Simon, wherein he says that the decision-making theory and the empiricism in the decision-making theory. Remember, when we talk about NPA, I made you explain that it is not at the cost of the rationality. Simon talks about then bounded rationality and things like that later. Okay. So the broad basing of public administration again is emphasized upon in the NPA, where in the different approaches like management, human relations approach, political approach, public choice approach, all actually take the center stage. That is why you see when the goals are there, the goal is not absolute goal. The goal is also a very flexible goal. Relevance, values, social equity, these things are there. Okay? Change, these things were there.
It's like the previous system, again, previous system, they are providing for stomach filling tank.
Right. The new one is focusing on nutrition. The other one was to simply counter the aspect of hunger. But now you are looking at a far more nuanced concept, far more detailed concept of nutrition. For example, earlier when we used to look at poverty, we used to look at poverty merely from the income orientation. Now you have things like multidimensional poverty index, where you are looking at things in a far broader spectrum. Also, you see newer dimensions are emerging. For example, during the COVID, we talked a lot about learning poverty, right? So these things are there. Now, let us have a look at the commentary on NPA a bit. So Golembowski actually considered NPA as a temporary and transitional phenomena. Right? Then scholars like Alan Campbell actually said it is nothing new. It is something which the scholars have always been talking about. But we will have to actually focus here that the NPA scholars provided it a far more structured orientation. There were not, random voices anymore, echoing from here and there. Okay? It is the idea that the NPA scholars actually raise these issues more vociferously in a far more structured debate manner, wherein the citizen participation, the societal angle, the ecology are being emphasized in a structured manner and with far greater force. I gave you example how Wilson actually developed the idea based on ecology. Okay, so things like that. Also, there are critics like Carter and Duffy. They say that the idea when we say social equity is at the core of NPA, they express their doubts. They say that the difference between what old and new you are saying is nothing. It's a cosmetic difference. The social problems at back then were different. The lack of scale of operations, economies of scale, those problems were different. Retrenchment were different. So even that was also ecological. What you are looking today, it's simply that the ecology has changed. The administration remains the same. Okay? But nonetheless, we'll have to agree to the point that especially in the post-World War II era, where the world was far more fragmented as we knew, where the different ecologies and the different socio-cultural phenomena could actually rise up, and NPA responded to those calls. Therefore, it marks a significant approach, a revolutionary approach, which shook the then status quo. Okay? Now, coming to the idea of Minobrook 3. Why I am saying this? Because Minobrook 3 actually happens in 2007-8. Right? So this is fairly recent. Also, this is something which is happening in the post-NPM era. But since we read the Minobrook 1-2 with regards to NPA, I am taking this up. Okay, and it again contributed. So we'll have to see its impact on the development. Alright. And this is in relation to the NPM. So we'll keep oscillating between NPM and all these things. Right. This is the advanced class, so I don't think anybody of you cannot understand this. Should we move friends watching us online? Have we understood that? Any doubts whatsoever? Okay. All right. Clear. Divyanshi, any doubt? NPA is anti-theoretical because it did not come up with a set of principles. It came up with a set of values. When we say it is anti-theoretical, and we have to cement this point, we'll have to keep the OPA, Old Public Administration, as a reference frame, where theory building, universalization of principle, nothing is public, administration is administration, nothing is public or private about it, things like that are there. Here in NPA is actually not getting into theory building, it is looking at the public administration from a wider perspective. Therefore they say that it made the administration so all encompassing that the universal theory building became problematic, and that is why we say it is anti-theoretical. Understood, Saurabh? Understood. Okay. So Minobrook 3. You see, Minobrook 2 happens when? Minobrook 2? अरे Minobrook 2 कब हुई थी भाई? 1988. Right? Just see, I am trying to appeal to your souls and understanding. किताबों में तो बहुत कुछ है, ठीक है? There's a lot of stuff in the books. Okay, one student was saying he is unable to see the class. I hope he is able to see the class. So this period in 1988 was characterized by a lot of stuff. The world was going through a lot in terms of how the Soviet Union, etc., were almost on the brink of breaking up. Interestingly, let me tell you, when this guy, American president, visits the Soviet Union, he is welcomed by two presidents. One is the president of Russian Federation, Boris Yeltsin, and other is Mikhail Gorbachev. Okay, so this was getting into something very different. Also, the idea of Reaganism and Thatcherism was moving towards ascendancy. Early 80s, Reaganism, Thatcherism comes. It was moving towards early, ascendancy. So, this gave rise to the idea of NPM. Okay. Where a far more normative approach comes with regards to the public administration. Then Osborne and Gabler gives the concept of reinventing government. And this all gives rise to the idea of entrepreneurial government. है कि नहीं? So this change, now it is reflecting in what? with regards to public administration. It is leading to things like debureaucratization. You will have to understand the bureau, as in France, was a characteristic. It was symptomatic of something. So the idea of the shunning of the traditional bureaucratic attitude, the change began. It was characterized by debureaucratization, democratization, decentralization. And this was happening in the headwinds of the LPG: liberalization, privatization, globalization. Now this happens and this echoes across the globe in administration and the way state sees. Then if you see the change, let us say from 1988, Gulf War, all these things happen. Similarly, the society has changed. The liberalization, privatization, globalization has changed a lot. So while talking about LPG, I talked about an advertisement of McDonald's, wherein Mikhail Gorbachev, actually probably 1996 or 1998, I don't remember, he features in that advertisement. Imagine an ex-Secretary General of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union appearing in a McDonald's advertisement. I mean, 7 or 8 years before the advertisement actually came, it was unthinkable. Okay, so the world was changing, and from Minobrook 2 to Minobrook 3, 20 years, technology, LPG, all these things actually changed a lot. And they changed not just the administration as a discipline, but also as a practice and what will be its goals. With regards to, let us say, environment, there have been several movements. With regards to the world administration, many new rules came up, right? Many new charters came up, many new regional groupings came up. For example, EU, etc. So a lot has happened in the intervening 20 years period. Okay. So when the Minobrook 3 happens, right? So the scholars are actually looking at examine the current status or critique the current public administration. Current means which was prevailing then, and to look into the future to see how the future of the field will be. So the conference was coordinated by Rosemary O'Leary. Rosemary O'Leary, who was a professor at the Syracuse University. And the theme was Future of Public Administration, Public Management and Public Service around the world. Two phases were there. The first phase was a pre-conference workshop, which was attended by new scholars. So again, you see something of a template being followed, wherein the new scholars are given the first slot. Okay. The second phase was a far more broader phase and more traditional conference was there, wherein around 220 participants from 13 countries participated. Now there were certain themes. They were not looking at the timeline of 1988. They were looking at it from the 68, because that is where Minobrook actually first time happens. So they survey and review the changes which have taken place since 1968. and they sought to develop new principles, new theories based on the present reality. Because NPM by then was almost 3 decades old. 80s में आता है ना NPM, 1980s. So based on the prevailing philosophy of NPM and keeping development at the core, NPA kept what at the core? Social equity. Here they keep development at the core. Okay? Because since Minnowbrook 1, many interdisciplinary discussions have happened. Also, they looked at the idea of networked governance. Network governance, or governance as we commonly know, a paradigm wherein the state, market and civil society come together to deliver on public interest. Okay. Also, they tried to factor in the role of globalization in the public administration. So like I said, that the whole idea was a critical inquiry. We need to remember, they meet not to reinforce something. Rather, the purpose of the conference was a critical inquiry. That whatever we are doing as public administration, both in theory and practice, is it relevant? And what is going to be the future? In future, what is going to happen? Okay? And since the focus areas were very broad, so public administration was actually looking at interventions in every possible field. Okay? So it encompasses broader field, interdisciplinary, that means political science, law, public management, public service delivery, social science. Also, they reflected upon the academia and the practitioner relations. Academia and the practitioner relations. Concepts like democratic performance. Democratic performance management. What do you mean by democratic performance management? What do you mean by democratic performance management? 3 वर्ड है. Democratic पता है क्या होता है? क्या होता है? Performance क्या होता है? Management क्या होता है? Democratic performance management would mean that while NPM, the prevailing era, was going about decentralization, is it actually performing? Is it actually giving results? Is the public happy? And how to manage that? Also, you see, because the issues which were raising to global stature, the idea of financial management. Q. This is the era, tax havens, hawala. Also, if you look at the present times, you have to mobilize so much of funding for, let us say, climate finance, developmental funding, wherein we are looking at models which are somewhat different from the 90s era of aid conditionalities. Right? Sustainability idea, globalization and comparative perspectives. I told you that how in the NPM era, because of globalization now, even the West can learn from the rest. in terms of addressing the prismatic elements. So linking CPA with NPM with the present era. Okay, that is there. Also, the IT, information technology, leadership, what should be the values, but it does not sacrifice social equity. It is also looking at notions of social equity and justice. Okay. You see, but certain conclusions emerge. When I say initially that they are looking at public administration, they actually come to a sort of a consensus wherein they say that yes, two separate PAs will remain. One a discipline, other a practice. But the dividing line between the two will increasingly get blurred. So if there is a question that in the present times, the dividing line between public administration as a theory and practice is blurring. Do you agree? Give reasons. Do you agree? Give reasons. लिख के लाइए इसे 10 नंबर में 10 marks. 10 marks. Okay. Then in terms of impact, I'm just giving you a hint. We will have to see it in terms of the impact, the theory and the practice. Also, how the scholarly views are evolving and how increasing convergence is happening between what is the scholar's view and what is the practitioner's view. Okay? Also, when we say democratic performance management, we are looking at certain criterias like transparency, accountability, performance-based outcomes, law-based democratic values such as equity, justice. Then with regards to the financial aspect of this, you see, globally what is happening? Increasingly the governments, and let us say we are part of that conference and we are sitting in 2008, because economic crisis happens, right? And they are actually, you will see that they in a way saw that coming, because the governments were increasingly getting dependent on the debt. Okay. And the centrality of the financial resources in government functioning cannot be ignored. But the funds were not getting managed in the best possible way. The funds should be managed so that these funds generate funds. Okay. So public financial management was emphasized. Globalization is something that I have told you. Also, with regards to legal, political, and public administration related dimensions, they sought to address the value conflicts that used to come regarding efficiency vis-a-vis legal and democratic. Because some things can be really efficient if you do them in a centralized manner. But is it right? Okay, things like that. So these things were getting emphasized. Similarly, on leadership and other methods. Now you see, when you see this aspect of public administration, The impact of on development is what? Does it slow down the impact? Does it slow down the development? No, this is a question I want you all to actually reflect upon. Yes, Anay. Yes, Devyanshi. Correct. Hanji. Do you see that this idea of development vis-a-vis the thought process that went through Minobrook 3, what it brought about? Has it slowed down the development? Let me just rephrase my question.
Side can, because multiple parties are involved in this. It takes a long decision-making process.
So you mean to say, and this is something that I want you all to think. You mean to say that participative decision making is a long and slow process, and hence it slows down the development. This is what you mean to say? Development from what point of view?
Saying it's basically time phase, man.
No, it might not be the case, because quick decisions can be decisions which are not accepted and hence not implemented. What about the global consensus that is there emerging on various issues? For example, the climate change. Recently, if you see in action on the regulation of artificial intelligence, on let us say weaponization of space, fossil fuels, rules-based order in seas, wars. Yes, I mean United Nations has been a terrible failure, but the churning is there. What if it would have been, let us say, a Western-centric view or an elite-centric view? Because otherwise we cannot say no participative. If it is elite, it is not participative. So it has certainly enriched the development. It has certainly brought about development discourse at a wider pedestal. When we say inclusion of African Union in G20, will it slow down the world economic development? It will enrich it. It will enrich the process. It will make everybody a stakeholder. So please remember, do not criticize it in a manner that you are doing. Altogether, you have to criticize it. You can criticize it on the fact that it erodes the national responsibility of the national governments, because they are held hostage, or they are compulsive into a compulsive compliance mode because of the global headwinds. We cannot do ये तो सब बाहर की वजह से है. But that was the case. That was there also. Even in 60s, 70s, Pandit ji, Mrs. Gandhi, everybody said that okay, globally it's like this. We cannot say. Okay, so the point is this: it has eroded the sense of national farm laws not getting accepted. That is a domestic issue. I would not link it with MBC, NPM, etc. The issues are different. That is can be an example that how a non-consultative process can lead to flawed outcomes. But I am asking you to look at it from the sense of public administration and how the global order evolves. Okay, so that is essentially the Minobrook 3 that I wanted to give it to you. Okay, next let us look at the Blacksburg Manifesto. You see, it is a part of the postmodern debate. I know that postmodernism and all those things are later, but Blacksburg Manifesto is a part of the postmodern debate. Okay, and It is an idea wherein it is akin to public administration in a time with no name or without a name. Okay. Now the first point is that is the Blackburg Manifesto relevant today? And will it be relevant tomorrow? Okay. If you look at the Blacksburg Manifesto, it was characterized by a very high degree of modernism. Whenever we talk about modernism, we talk about change. Okay? That we are looking at public administration from something which is beyond a functionalist paradigm. Okay? Where in the traditional, the established ideas of public administration are actually surpassed and looked beyond. It is, as per the manifesto, it provides an agency perspective. It provides an agency perspective. Now, link it. This Blacksburg's manifesto is happening in late 80s, 90s, early 90s. Now, interestingly, to look at the problems and to find solutions, it emphasizes on dialogue. किसकी अप्रोच थी ये? Because you see, the modern world or the post-modern world is actually very, very diverse. It's an era of complexity, hyper-diversity, and self-referentiality. So, कौन सा thinker यहाँ emphasize हो रहा है when we are emphasizing on dialogue to actually resolve complexity, to resolve problems? कौन सा concept? अरे वो तो ठीक है, फ्रेडरिक्सन मैं भी समझ गया, मिनोब्रुक too. But this postmodern, which classical thinker is being emphasized? Dialogue. याद आया कुछ? Yes. So it requires a far more integrative approach. So public administration in the post-modernist era, which is characterized by complexity, self-referentiality, hyper-diversity, etc. So you need a world which is there to actually come up with dialogue to resolve these issues. That means there needs to be a far more tolerance, far more flexibility regarding certain basic ambiguities and paradoxes. So that is where this Blacksburg Manifesto is coming from. Yes, we are talking about MBC2, 1988. Yes, we are talking about the emergence of the NPM. But it is the postmodern world that is into the focus. Because in 1983, the Blacksburg Manifesto actually starts the journey. Era of Reaganism, Thatcherism, Fole is a classical thinker, but see how it is reverting to a strand from Fole when it comes to integration, to resolve the conflict. When we say classicals are relevant even today, Fole is a classical thinker, I agree, you agree, we all agree.
Fole's concepts were behavioral.
That is why we see Fole was ahead of her times. So even Blacksburg's manifesto is taking a leaf out of Fole, where it is emphasizing upon the dialogue. Okay, John Rohr was amongst one of the contributors to this. Gary Wamsley, Charles Goodsill, John Rohr, Orion White, Jim Wolfe. Okay, and their deliberations actually resulted in what we today call as the Blacksburg Manifesto. So Blacksburg Manifesto, yes, the immediate environment was American public administration. But its echoes, its reverberations can be felt across the world and across the body of public administration. It is looking at factors such as competency, legitimacy of the administration. Actually, this is all I'm talking about in context of American public administration, but you can extrapolate it. So it is saying that the legitimacy that the administration it derives from actually comes from the American Constitution. We are talking about American public administration, let's be clear. But take it, paper 2, unit 2. Value premise and idea of constitutionalism, etc. So the legitimacy that the administration derives from actually comes from the Constitution. Then in 1987, an edited version comes out of this manifesto with more authors who actually shared their views and appended them. They emphasize on, you see, ऐसा तो है नहीं ना. It is not the situation that today I thought there should be NPM and from tomorrow the NPM started. NPM must have got framed by some views, some actions on the ground. 1988, Minnowbrook 2 happens, and this comes in 1987 in a big way. 1983, the work started. So it is actually emphasizing on certain elements which will then contribute to the conceptual and the practical aspects of public administration. The legitimacy aspect is there. Another aspect which it emphasizes upon is the aspect of public participation, which you see getting realized in governance and good governance. Why am I saying this? Always question, if I am drawing the legitimacy of the administration from Constitution, what if I do not draw the legitimacy from the Constitution? Then can we say that the administration is responsive, accountable, transparent? No, this is how it is shaping up. That the administrative action should not be in contravention to the ethos of the Constitution. So it is shaping up that value. Okay. You see, the Reaganism and Thatcherism was a new wave. It actually talked about the market mechanisms. Right? There was overemphasis on the idea of the market mechanisms, processes to be brought about. Okay? So the government was getting underemphasized. So the market begin to actually dictate the social policy. So the democratic ethos of the administration, particularly in democratic countries, right? That was getting challenged. It was considered as intrusive, ineffective, wasteful bureaucracy. So the manifesto actually came as a balancing force to this rampant market orientation. It says no, that the state is relevant. It has only been reoriented. The state,
manifesto defended Weber's bureaucracy.
we cannot say that he defended Weber's bureaucracy because they did not talk like that. He said that the state and the administration is relevant. Just because the market is now performing and in certain areas performing better, we have incorporated the market principles and processes. But the relevance of the state remains. The state is all the more relevant to help resolve problematic social conditions. So while the manifesto was actually reflecting the consciousness of modernism, so in the postmodern world, the manifesto reflects the consciousness of modernism. Okay? So, in which paradigm will you actually place the Blacksburg Manifesto? Because manifesto talks about the theoretical issues that are vital to the field of public administration, and they will continue to remain. How the state should respond. This is the core, no? This will continue. So where will you place? Q?
Public administration as a public administration.
You see,
Indian opposite as a
while it is referring to the traditional method of dialogue, where will you place it? At the same time, you see, it is actually reflecting at the ontology and the phenomenology or the epistemology of those times. So it is very difficult to place. Okay? But in a nutshell, we can say that the spirit of the Blacksburg Manifesto transcends the paradigms. And in that nutshell, it actually places the public administration as a constitutionally grounded agency, which is sensitive to the values of the society it is dealing with. It is ecological. It uses dialogue as a way to create common sense. So every such agency is going to be subordinate to the constitution, yet independent. ओके, अंडरस्टूड? ये समझ में आ गया? Has everybody understood this? Friends watching us online, has everybody understood this? Okay. Now, let us look into some areas wherein we can talk about the NPM. Okay. But before that, let us look into somewhat a postmodern approach, because since I have actually started the thread, so let us briefly look at the postmodern approach. Okay. You see, science and reason, ever since we saw the idea of enlightenment, have become the first tools of inquiry. Right? Science and reason, logic, extrapolated, you can say rationality. Okay. And this we saw getting actually seeped into the idea of social sciences, right? And therefore, the idea of social and sciences actually emerges, right? Further developments happen by people who use this approach to actually theorize. For example, Weber himself, Marx, Karl Marx, Durkheim, etc. Okay. So science, the idea of modernism, which was characterized by these things, was that the science would free the people from natural and social constraints and will bring about objectivity. If we look at the public administration, this very scientific or modernist approach to public administration gets reflected in hierarchy, the notion of technical expertise, right? But it is also characterized by administration being a preserve of the few. That means the alienation of the citizens, the passivity of the citizens. And this got criticized by behavioralists. By in an organization, if we are looking at the passivity of the worker and the rule of the so-called principles or administration or science or management, we are looking at the passivity, that he is no more than a cog in the wheel kind of an approach, right? But this approach was getting criticized by the behavioralist, and this gave rise to the increased amount of contradictions, deliberations. So in the democratic political space, we see deliberative politics, notions of empowerment, decentralization, democratic processes. Now, what is the approach? The modern approach said that you look at the reason and science, but that approach was resulting in alienation of the public, the citizens, the participation, the human behavioral aspect was getting neglected. Now, what is the approach? That answer is the postmodern approach, because the search for an alternative approach was there. And through this, the idea of postmodernism emerges. Which is, post means what? Modernism was characterized by science and reason or logic. So postmodernism is something which is after that. Have we all understood this basic ABC idea of postmodernism? पढ़ा है ये पहले? है? नहीं पढ़ा? याद नहीं है. पढ़ा है? हाँ. But that postmodern theory is coming from here, no? You are not just looking at the science and the rationality aspect, but other aspects like values, etc., etc. Friends watching online, have they understood these basics of postmodern ideas that I am talking about? Have we all understood?
Like the social media comes in postmodern.
Okay. All right. Okay. So you see, let me contextualize this even more, sort of substantiate on this even more. You see, post-industrial revolution era, right, where in the later part of the era we see scientific management and other things coming up. And it was characteristic of industrial reforms, right, that were not only, the industrial reforms was a outcome of the technology that was coming in, the scale of the organizations getting bigger, and the industrial reforms were coming in terms of bringing about productivity and efficiency. So we can say that the period that starts from late 1800s and early 1900s through 1960s was an era of this post-industrial reforms, wherein we say that the bureaucratic and all the aspects of the industry are being looked at. The structural, functional, organizational, every aspect is being looked at, and therefore the scientific management, bureaucratic model, politico-administration dichotomy, the organizational rationality, and these things actually come up, they transform the industrial landscape and make it more efficient. Okay? But 60s and the transition is happening. Please understand, ho kya raha hai? Simultaneously a lot of things are happening. Cut to 1960s. This is 15 years after the Second World War, and the countries are emerging. New countries are emerging. And the world as a population, somebody has lost a husband, somebody has lost a son, father and whatnot. It's still fresh. Get into the soul of it. It's still fresh. And on the discipline front, this is the ecology, this is shaping up. On the discipline front, the behavioralists are gaining currency. Okay? Because these very models, which were hailed as champions of the industrial reform, are now being accused of restricting the human behavior and not being adequately representative of the societal mood. So they start losing the relevance. Okay? Understood? So Simon says this interestingly in 1983 about the idea of the modernism. It cannot tell us where to go. At best, it can tell us how to get there. showing the mechanistic nature and the value hollowness that the then prevailing industrial reform was emblematic of. Okay? So while centralization, rationalization, bureaucratization, specialization, industrialization were characteristic of the modernist era, but you saw problems like ill health, unemployment, social insecurity, environmental degradation also reaching much higher levels, alarming levels in this era. And therefore, you see later on part when we talk about the Blacksburg Manifesto and all that, because things are related. ऐसा तो नहीं है ना that it's not like that. The 20 years period is a very big period in the larger scheme of things. That is why it is emphasizing Blacksburg Manifesto and etc. are because the Reaganism and Thatcherism are like the last flare of that era. And it is cautioning on the legalization aspect, transparency, legitimacy, gender, administrative responsibility. And through the 60s and 70s, you see the NPA movement also gaining currency. Okay, so whether Waldo, Golembowski, Fredrickson, they all countered this traditional industrial reform era. Okay, so that is there because the traditional public administration was full of orthodox behavior. In fact, Simon himself, while working on the administrative behavior, says that the individual or the group preference cannot be considered as scientific or organizationally efficient. Fact value dichotomy yaad hai kuch? He stressed on facts. Okay, and therefore you see Simon advocates a positivist approach. That is why we say that Simon's positivist approach is problematic. Positivism, session 1. Because he is looking at it from what? From a modernist, positivist approach of rationality and logic. Science and logic. So positivist approach was doing what? It was looking for commonalities in all the organizational settings, so that the scientific stature of public administration as a true social science, wherein things can be observed, things can be measured, can be established. But obviously the critics say, the anti-positivists say that the human behavior cannot be simply an observation. There are emotions, feelings, intuitions. And the post-World War II period was such period wherein everybody was tired. The world was tired. Nobody was looking at the organizational efficiency as the primary idea. Everybody was looking at self-satisfaction, the satisficing idea. Okay, so the idea of one best way was replaced with multiple things slowly. Okay, and this all gives fuel to the idea of postmodernism. Why? Because the trust in the science of administration, the science and government was diminishing. Because it failed to remove poverty, it failed to remove social inequity, and the trust of the people in the state as it was being run then started getting eroded. Inadequate healthcare, education, unemployment, environmental issues, all of them started to come to fore. Also, you see, this era was also marked by a rise in capitalism. भाई एक बात बताइए, take it from this. America practically became the factory of arms for the entire world during the Second World War. Now they ramped up operations, machines, etc., profits. Second World war becomes over. You see, this is just for your intellectual, uh, hunger. I am giving you. Never write this in the exam. This is to understand. If you see from the Second World War till today, America is at war, either directly or indirectly. 1945, Second World War ends. 50, Korean War begins. The Japanese occupation of the Japanese Isles is still there. General Douglas MacArthur then transfer the power, new constitution comes up. 60s, you see, Vietnam War. It endures up to 70s. 70s, the murmurs started coming up in Middle East, Kosovo, Herzegovina, these places. 70s, 80s, Afghanistan, other places. 90s, again Balkans, right? Gulf War. Then 2000s, again second Gulf War, I mean Iraq and Afghanistan, and then places like Libya, etc. Now Ukraine. Okay. So the point is this, that immediately after the Second World War, there was a social fragmentation that exists because the global capitalism was driving it. Okay. So the social divide actually rose manifold, and it was the duty of the administration to address these challenges. That is why you see NPA, etc., advocate the society oriented approach. Okay, the contextuality changes. The administration have to become contextual. The skepticism increases because the postmodern thinking is skeptical. It is looking at with the politics of the day with inquiry, that whether the representation is there or it is just perpetuating the elitist culture. Therefore, it talks about decentralization. No, earlier it was elitist because they were promoting the vested interest, an arbitrary sort of decision making. Okay, so they say that the representation is perverse, fraudulent, artificial, mechanical, deceptive, incomplete, misleading, insufficient, inadequate for this age. And therefore, things like Schumacher writes a book, Small is Beautiful. Small is beautiful. And that gets translated into the public administration. Not to suggest that they deliberately took the Schumacher's book, but the idea is that this thinking started gaining ground amongst the intelligentsia across the social sciences. That this representation is the perverse and therefore small, local. That is why you see thinking like neo-localism, bottom-up governance, and all these things are rising. Okay, and this again gets reflected in the paradox as we see in the globalization. So if we look at the postmodern alternative or the postmodern spirit within the public administration, we are looking at organizational humanism. It gets reflected in NPA. If you look at the central themes, it is dialectic. It is dialectic. That means you need to be self-reflective. You need to facilitate. So the dialectic inquiry within the postmodernist view of public administration say that they use it as a tool to humanize and democratize the administration. Humanize and democratize the organizational processes. So that the institutional dysfunctionalism that is characteristic of the modernist era can be countered. Understood? Then another thing which is emphasized is deconstruction. Deconstruction. The traditional public administration, centralized, ivory tower approach. So it is emphasizing on the deconstruction to actually critically examine these very structures and the processes which were emblematic of the TPA or the traditional public administration, to understand how they can relate and better work for the society. Okay, so postmodernist critique of Weber, postmodernist critique of Taylor, यहीं से आता है ना. Also, you see, the postmodernist ideas were not looking at creating a unique theory, creating a single theory. Rather, they said that the approach should be such that it can accommodate fragmented and diverse perspectives so that more creativity can be there. Another thing which postmodernist perspective emphasize is deterritorialization. ये सब पढ़ा है पहले कभी? Have you all read about it? हाँ, ये टर्म्स नहीं पढ़े. सी, अब आपको कैसे पर्सपेक्टिव मिलेगा? हाउ यू विल गेट द पर्सपेक्टिव एंड हाउ यू कैन एनरिच योर आंसर्स. ओके, till here any doubt friends? Any doubts whatsoever? Divyanshi, Anay? Okay, deterritorialization means that the representations that were existed, that were based on territorial representation, which were based on scientific ideas. Okay, so TPA, the traditional public administration, used to look at what? Symmetry, homogeneity, universal knowledge. So again, centralizing tendencies. Whereas the postmodern perspectives talk about the reality, heterogeneity, asymmetry, local knowledge. Okay. Next is, which they emphasize on, is the imagination. ये तो easy है समझना. The TPA was actually looking at principles, no sort of creativity, no changes. Okay, so the rationalization is the word for TPA. Imagination is the word for postmodern analysis. Okay, so when you talk about imagination, it is a far more value laden idea. Okay, next is alterity. Alterity. That means a moral stance that counters the concept of standard bureaucratic efficiency. So it prefers diversity of opinions, attitudes, assumption. It is an idea that every act of administration impacts someone, whether directly or indirectly. So if you look at the alterity, it would get manifested in openness, the resistance against injustice. So it's a more proactive agenda, you understand, coming from the moral dispositions, service orientation.
The old post-Indian models are post-modern.
No, you cannot say that. Are they purely postmodern? No. We are largely looking at the discipline and how the best or how deeper inroads can be made into the practice. That's just a way of inquiry. You understand? The earlier way of inquiry was scienticism and logic. Now you are making it a far more value based. But are the paradigms purely value based? No. It's not the case. So you see, the postmodern ideas, the postmodern philosophy gets reflected in the way this, discipline is looked at. Okay. One of them being phenomenology that we discussed earlier. Phenomenology. Now comes the meaning. Earlier I gave you an idea where I do not know the meaning. Right? Now we will see the meaning and see how close we were when initially we thought about those ideas. Okay, so it's a phenomenology is nothing but it's a philosophy which thinks that reality consists of the experiences of individuals, the meanings that individuals attribute to certain objects. So if you combine the phenomenological approach, because it is looking at reality, experiences, with the critical theory and interpretivism, first class, interpretivism, looking at far deeper, positivism, positivism, interpretivism, we see. The critical theory, to look at things with critical theory, phenomenological approach, and interpretivism, essentially a summation of it will be nothing but a postmodernist approach. A summation of it would be postmodernism approach. Okay, so phenomenological approach is something which is a constituent. Critical theory is something that we can see in Marx. He actually looks at the established notion of the state in terms of his views on power, conflict, control. Even Dendart are the critical theorists. Okay? Which is looking at value-based normative character of public administration. Okay? Similarly, you see the modern discourse, whether we are looking at things from the environmental perspective, we are looking at things from the feminist perspective. All of these are the postmodernist approaches. So, the postmodern approach actually brings in these elements. Therefore, you see the characteristics which get highlighted. Direct democracy. Direct democracy. You tweet to the minister. You tweet your public representative. Don't go through the traditional process of writing applications, letter to the editor. Tweet it. Okay, from nation building to networking. Understood? समझ में आ गया ये? Just flip through the pages and let me know if there is any doubt. Then we'll start with the NPM. क्या कुछ दिक्कत है? समझ में आ गया? Okay, deconstruction समझ नहीं आया सौरभ को? What else? Okay, so I'll explain deconstruction again. You see, deconstruction is nothing but a postmodern technique of analysis, wherein you critically analyze the centralizing tendencies of the TPA, traditional public administration, in consonance with the changing nature of the society, not in isolation. Okay? So, it has been used as a perspective to critically interpret the things. For example, the Weberian bureaucracy, the Taylorian administration, to actually look at the contradictions which are there. So the deconstruction idea is more of a criticism of TPA than coming up with, a separate theory, and reinforcing that there can be multiple interpretations which can exist, a scope of diversity, fragmentation in public administration. That citizens and administration both can play a role. Understood, Saurabh? Friends, others, understood? Should we move ahead? Divyanshi, understood? Okay. Now, let us take up NPM, and through NPM we'll try and address more ideas. Okay, just the way through NPA we started with NPA and moved to postmodern ideas and linked it all around the places. So there's this question which emerges. The new public management has been branded by certain scholars as neo-Taylorism. Neo-Taylorism. I understand that there is neo-Taylorism, etc. given in your session plan. We'll be talking about it, but you should reflect on it. Neo-Taylorism would mean what? Taylorism is back in a new avatar. There would be certain characteristics of Taylorism. Okay, so they say NPM is nothing but neo-Taylorism. First of all, is the comparison between NPM and Taylorism justified? It asks, is the comparison justified? What factors have led to the decline of NPM soon after its birth? This question was a 20 marker asked in 2070. हाँ जी, कोई तो बतलाओ, इतना मेंस लिखने जा रहे हैं, we are about to write the mains.
NPM was combination of neo-Taylorism and public choice approach.
Okay.
Neo-Taylorism was all about Taylor's idea in governance.
और बोलो. To that extent, you are right that when you combine the public choice approach, the PCA, with with Taylorism and say that it is characteristic or a product of NPM, that is why new public service later comes and corrects the ills of the NPM. Here you are thinking in the right direction. But when we say about the question that is it, first of all, is the comparison justified? If I compare apples and oranges, it is not justified, right? Apart from the commonality that they are fruits. If I compare an orange and a kinu, it is somewhat justified. You understand? So you will have to come up with certain grounds. Hai ki nahi? And then the NPM, the decline which has happened. Chaliye. Go and write this question today. I'll dictate this question. Okay? One question I gave earlier for homework. Right? Another question is this PYQ. NPM has been branded by certain scholars. NPM has been branded by certain scholars as neo-Taylorism. Full stop. NPM has been branded by certain scholars as neo-Taylorism. Full stop. Is it a justified comparison? Question mark. Is it a justified comparison? Question mark. What factors have led to the decline of NPM? What factors have led to the decline of NPM as soon after its birth? As soon after its birth. Now please understand, I do not need your notes. NPM, this. Factors led to decline, this. This is supposed to be an answer. It's a 20 marker. So calibrate your words accordingly. Ultimately, it's one question. It has these 2 or 3 subparts. So try and address it properly. Okay. Let's have a look at more questions. 2018, 10 marker. New public service approach is an improvement over its predecessor, NPM. Easy? Easy? This question is easy, right? Because you get the hints of this question in the previous question. Hai na? Next. Again 2018, 15 marker. Ab dekho. The phenomenological approach advocated by okay, this is NPA that we discussed. I'm sorry. Okay, अब समझ में आ गया phenomenological approach. Now you have understood. Okay. Next, NPM. Yeah. Has the new public management, NPM, failed in promoting a democratic polity? Analyze in the context of individuals as citizens and individuals as customer. This is 2019-15 marker. Kya lag nahi raha? This is and the 2017, the 20 marker that we discussed, that I have asked you to write. Similar sa nahi hai? Hai na? Similar. Then 2019, again a 10 marker. Contractualism has become a favorite policy of neoliberal forces, but not without its share of controversy. Argue. Isn't this also the criticism or one of the reasons for the downfall of NPM? Hai ki nahi? Okay. Again, 2020. New public service emphasizes democracy and citizenship as the basis for public administration theory and practice. Now understand. The earlier question that we were doing, we were looking at the failures or the lacunas of NPM and the coming up of NPS. Now it is looking at a positive light. The string remains the same, the length differs. Earlier we were looking at from here, now we are looking at from here. So same thing is getting repeated again and again. That is why I said one question is enough, provided you understand that in the exam हमें घुमाना पड़ सकता है. But the logic and the soul remains the same. In the exam, we'll just have to play with it. Okay, next question. Similar, 2020. Accountability under NPM has undergone a radical change, although the focus has continued to remain on management. Here you can use the critique of the Blacksburg Manifesto, legitimacy, democracy. आई बात समझ में? भाई ब्लैक्सबर्ग मैनिफेस्टो यूज कर सकते हैं ना इधर. The moment you write things in generalities, they remain general. But the moment you put weight, your answer becomes pabadish. Okay, 2021. Now please see this question. New public service model approaches governance on the premise of an active and involved citizenship, wherein the role of public officials is to facilitate opportunities for citizens' engagement in governance. Same democratic aspect, new public service, right? Okay, write your third homework. I might just touch upon it, but I will not dwell upon it because things are understood and I feel that there is no point in actually getting a very deep dive into it. The new public service approach, make a comprehensive note, linking it with all these PYQs, capture all the dimensions that are there in these PYQs that I have talked about. (2022). Understand this. First question, first part, 1A was there in 2022. Public management takes what and why from public administration and how from business management. Next, again 2022, third B, 15 mark. New public service celebrates what is distinctive, important and meaningful about public service. Look at the way the essence of NPS, where we talked about democratization, all those things, it has been abstracted. Generic terms पे question ने vague बना दिया. The question has made it vague. Distinctive means there are multiple things important and meaningful about public service. Understood? Hanji. Any doubts whatsoever? Understood the task? 3 tasks have been given. 2 questions and 1 this new public service thing. Okay? Now, I will just lecture. There will be less board work. Okay? And I want you to imbibe this. Make notes wherever it is there, needed by you. So if you look at the NPM, it is not a single approach. The broad ideas can be there, but it is a collection of various methods. Okay? If you look at the start of NPM, it started primarily with the OECD countries and the USA, Australia in the 80s, wherein it spread rapidly. Okay? Because various governments, as per their own needs, were twisting the approaches. So there was not a single unified approach. But one characteristic of NPM was to reduce the burden on the state. And this reduced burden and the idea to actually shed the responsibility is one of the critiques of the NPM as well. And it still continues to hound the governance philosophy. Okay, so privatizing of functions which were earlier being discharged by the state, that was one manifestation of this shedding of the burden. Another was the process orientation and the process change within the state, the internal change, bringing up of the private management practices, performance management, total quality management, customer driven measures. Okay, so hood, I hope you all know hood. अरे क्रिस्टोफर अपना क्रिस्टोफर. Okay, so hood actually considers NPM as a marriage of two streams. Okay, so one stream is emanating from this new understanding of transparency, user choice, incentives being provided, etc. And the second stream is the adoption of these very management practices to the administration. Okay, so understood this idea of two streams. Understood the idea of these two streams. ठीक. Now, if in a nutshell you will put, the NPM will be characterized by a few things. That is, in a nutshell, you restructure the government operation on market lines. Okay? Also, reduction in the size, structure, functions of the state, expenditure of the state. So one is the reform within and other is the reform in the soul, the way it is thinking. Okay? You distinguish, you earmark certain strategic functions, you keep it, and the rest you privatize. Okay? Stress on service delivery, value for money. So NPM actually comes across as an idea which rehabilitated the state which was facing a legitimacy crisis. Okay? Because the public sector was under pressure to deliver more. Also, forces of globalization, trade, etc. were increasing the competition. Real growth was elusive, and hence NPM comes. Okay? So therefore, focus will be on entrepreneurial skills, activities in the society in general. You see, state and society are also in a symbiotic relationship. Both impact each other. You look at the thought process of communist countries, people in general, by the government and all those things. So it actually impacts each other. Okay. So while the NPM as a doctrine was termed by Hood 1991. Pollitt actually labels or calls it as managerialism. Entrepreneurial government, Osborne and Gabler. Post-bureaucratic paradigm, post-bureaucratism by Barazeli. Okay? So it abhors, it does not want the public sector to expand more. Okay? It says that we should create a powerful coalition of interest to counter the welfare demanding coalitions. Because such people, the vested interest and the interest of the bureaucrats are the same. Power maximization, resource capture, etc., etc., etc. The idea is to depoliticize the economic decision making. Whatever public sector remains, that should get the best of technology, best of practices. So you see, NPM as an idea initially when it acquired the seedling, it was to transform the public sector and the relationship between the state and the society into a more result oriented, accountability driven state or administration. Therefore, we can say that NPM is nothing but a normative reconceptualization of public administration. A normative reconceptualization of public administration. That means you should provide high quality services, autonomy to the officials. There should be a clear system of award, reward, promotions. Okay? Spirit of competition, open-minded attitude. And this will be achieved through what? Through focusing the productivity, marketization, service orientation, decentralization, distinguishing policy from execution. Distinguishing policy from execution. क्या मतलब? क्या समझे? Wilsonian. So Wilsonian dichotomy is alive with NPM. Comment. Okay? So that is there. So you are looking at a shift from policy to management, aggregation to disaggregation, a shift from planning and public service welfareism to cost cutting and labor discipline, from process to output controls to accountability. Okay? Hood, and I am talking about Hood, actually identifies 7 main features of NPM. These are hands-on professional management, hands-on professional management, clear-cut responsibility, the manager will ensure that accountability is fixed, clear standards and measures of performance, emphasis on output control. Okay. Output control, emphasis on output control. Ultimately, what the system is doing, whether you are producing some output or not. Okay. Disaggregation of units, breaking up of large entities into smaller ones. Greater competition in public sector. Flexibility in hiring and rewards. Private sector like management. That is why you see the PSUs now no more actually recruit through the government exam. They have their own way. Okay. Greater discipline. So you see the TPA, the traditional public administration, at the core of it was bureaucracy and politics administration dichotomy. The NPM actually is rooted in the economic rationale and private sector management. So it is a product of the economic thinking on the government. The traditional bureaucracy was perceived or seemed to be labeled as a tool for public service. But in the modern era, these very civil service was now perceived as elitist. And therefore, NPM actually promotes diminishing influence of these very elite civil services. So NPM is stressing on private collaboration to reduce that elitism which is there. Call for reform of the state institutions. Okay? Stressing upon accountability, etc., etc. So you see, this new public model, the NPM, the new model also came as a reform model. It was not merely a paradigm, it was also a reform model. Okay? It was also a reform model. So this is something that you should keep in mind. Now, there are other issues which have actually cropped up. Those issues are in the sense that the sovereignty of the state, the analysts say that because of these market principles gaining salience over a period of time in an increased manner, has brought about a competition between sovereign state and supermarket state. Okay? Because you look at most of the countries, they are democratic in some or the other form. There are electoral mechanisms. And the civil service in all of these countries play a very pivotal role. And this politico-administrative system, the policy making has been the sole preserve of this system. It has been a characteristic feature कि ये तो हम ही करेंगे, we will only do it. But this sovereign, rationality-bound state also meant a centralized state with a very large public sector looking at standardization and equality as common features. So this model itself is nothing but a symbol of that state. But NPM changes that. NPM actually brings a change to this entire edifice of the state which has existed. So this state which is now emerging with the influence of NPM is being labeled as a supermarket state. This only limits the state to a service provider role with an emphasis on efficiency, quality, and actually views the people as consumers, clients, users. So you are actually turning the hierarchy upside down. People were at the last, now people are at the top. Under the guise of which values? Economic values and norms. So a direct, individual oriented democracy with a huge economic blend which is there. Also, if you look at this NPM, it is a blend of economic and managerial value. So these are the debates that I want you to reflect upon. Citizen versus client orientation. While NPM actually emphasizes upon the responsiveness, it is not saying it should not be responsive. So it is not anti-citizen, but the perspective changes. Because your TPA actually committed the bureaucracy to provide effective and equitable public service. NPA also says, NPA also said the same thing. But NPM, instead of actually strengthening the state, say empower the citizens. So the approach is change.
So what is the exact impact of NPM on democratic accountability?
It has reduced. Critics would say it has reduced. Democratic accountability has reduced in NPM. That is why NPM actually failed and new public service comes into the picture. That is the reason, because the democratic accountability वो ठीक है, but accountability, you have reversed the structure, but you have not cleared the green channel of accountability. That is the problem. That is what is being brought by the NPS. That is why you see governance was not enough, good governance came. Okay, so that is the idea. So NPM calls the empowerment of those very customers, not the citizens.
You are able to pay and you are getting the service.
Exactly. So that's kind of the logic which is there. Also the managerial accountability instead of a larger democratic accountability that we used to talk about. Okay. Thank you. So remember these little differences, they can actually travel a long way. Okay. In terms of how you look at it. Now a bit on the NPA and its orientation vis-a-vis the TPA, the old public management. Rather, write it like this: NPM versus OPM, old public management. So NPM is looking at the M part of it. Understand? M part, management part. Okay, so it is emphasizing on what? Quality, efficiency, customer satisfaction, privatization, market concepts such as contracting out, user charges, etc. Whereas administration It has a different goal, the citizen welfare. So while the administration deals with policy making and implementation, so the public administration, when you are looking at NPM for public administration, the word public should be given the utmost importance, right? Because ultimately it is the public administration which is looking at the public interest, and there are variety of stuff, social sanction, constitution, etc., which are restricting its misadventures. The management orientation actually compromises on these aspects. Okay, it is not the first time that the management orientation has been advocated. पहले भी हो चुका है, it has happened earlier as well, right? किसको याद है क्या हो चुका है? अरे विल्सन ही है सबसे पहले तो. That is why we are not talking about it public management, but new public management, because public management has happened before as well. Okay. So this is something that you need to keep in mind. So while the OPM relied on traditional bureaucracy, that is hierarchy and standardization, control from above, NPM just shifts the structure. Okay, delegation is there as a feature of NPM, decentralization. Okay, the traditional public administration, the management orientation or the OPM was regarding the improvement of the public services to serve the citizen, whereas NPM is looking at client orientation. There the citizen orientation was there, OPM. Okay. The OPM believed in the coexistence of both public and private sectors, whereas NPM favors the private sector. Okay, so clearly NPM is a lot more than just imparting the managerial philosophy. Okay, so just write down certain bullet words. Okay, make a table. Write component. Okay, then write the NPM, then write the TPM or OPM. I hope you understand. Traditional public management, old public management, new public management, component. Okay, so I'll be going like this: component, then what did new said and what did O said. I will not label them again and again that this is new, this is old. Okay, focus, clients, next is citizens and communities. So the component is focus, NPM is clients, and TPM is citizens and communities. Next, principal means. Management and policy making. On one side is management, the TPM is policy making. Next component, characteristics of public servants. Within NPM, write entrepreneur, within bracket acting. Acting. With TPM, write analyst, thinking. Values. Next is values. Entrepreneurship, freedom for managers, flexibility, creativity, enthusiasm, risk taking. TPM, ministerial responsibility, prudence, stability, ethics, probity, fairness, transparency. Next component, vocabulary. You see why I'm giving you vocabulary? Because it tells you the difference in the thinking. You call somebody miser or you call somebody a parsimonious. Things are different. Okay. Service to clients, quality skills, managerialism, empowerment, privatization. In the TPM, right? Public interest, democracy, social equity, due process of law. Next component, culture. Culture. Within NPM, right? Private sector, innovation, business management, accountability by results, politics, administration, dichotomy. Whereas in the TPM, bureaucratic or hierarchical. Functionalism, stability, process accountability. Politics, administration, continuum. Next component, structures. Within bracket, write civil services. Okay? Civil services. So in NPM, they are merely organizational units. Simple and frugal. Simple and frugal. Quasi-market mechanisms. Quasi-market mechanisms. decentralization. Whereas in TPM, they were as institutions, not merely organizational units. Large departments, central authority, resource allocation. Okay, these things are there. Then create another table. Why I'm giving you this? Because one glance and you will get the entire picture. Okay, difference between TPA and NPM. These were the component wise difference, wherein you have to write in substantial terms. In examination, if somewhere a small mention is to be given, the canvas is broader, you can use the following one. Okay, between the TPA and NPA. So here the TPA is first and NPM is later. TPA and NPM. So TPA, Traditional Public Administration, was about policy administration dichotomy. Whereas NPM is talking about fusion, or rather not fusion, confluence. Huh? NPM. TPA and NPM. TPA and NPM. अभी बताएंगे. इसके अंदर टीपीए की बात हो रही है, टीपीएम की बात नहीं हो रही. यहां क्या लिखा है? टीपीए लिखा है ना, पब्लिक एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन. वहां हम क्या बात कर रहे थे? पब्लिक मैनेजमेंट. डिफरेंस बिटवीन एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन एंड मैनेजमेंट. अमरजीत, डिफरेंस बिटवीन एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन एंड मैनेजमेंट. बेसिक है ना ये. Why I am equating it with now TPA is for the reason that NPM itself is considered as a paradigm, and therefore one, we are looking at it as a practice. NPM and OPM or TPM, now we are looking at it as a paradigm. That is why we talked about there the components. Here we are talking about the broader conceptual angles. So policy administration confluence in NPM. In TPA, government is the exclusive provider of goods and services or public services. Whereas in part of NPM, it is government, market, civil society, etc. Your TPA was structured oriented, whereas NPM is people oriented. TPA, secrecy, anonymity, whereas NPM, people friendly, responsive, transparent. TPA, authoritative approach, clear distinction between public and private, whereas NPM, participatory approach, public private partnership. Participative approach, public private partnership. TPA, emphasis on rules, structures and processes. Emphasis on rules, structures, processes. NPM, emphasis is on performance and outcomes. TPA, hierarchical. NPM, flexible. Okay. Does everybody knows the Osborne and Gabler's concept of reinventing government entrepreneurial state? पता है ना ये? ठीक. So I'm not touching upon it. Now, everybody knows BPR, business process reengineering. Business process reengineering, right? So I'm not touching on that either. Now, let us come to a far more conceptual question. A far more conceptual question, because of which I made you write the idea, the difference between TPA and NPM. Is NPM really a paradigm? Is NPM really a paradigm? This is the broader question that we are trying to raise here. What is a paradigm? Any paradigm will have a community of scholars as well as practitioners, right? There would be a common theoretical or a shared theoretical backbone that will make up of the discipline, right? Some methodology, some epistemology, some proofs, some tools, okay? Some problem resolution model. If there is a problem, this has been solved, okay, which is called as a exemplar. Okay, there will be definitions, formulas, or whatever. So, paradigm, anything which is a paradigm is nothing but a universally recognized scientific achievement which is peer reviewed as a body of scholars and all these things. And they provide a solution to the communities that in which they are being propounded or being worked upon. And that is why you see science has been moving from one stage to another. Now, if you look at the paradigms in the social sciences, then this debate comes under question. Why? Then it is debatable. Why? Because when we look at the paradigm from a purely scientific point of view, then there are stages in the evolution of public administration which cannot be called as a paradigm. Or scholars have a differing view. For example, if I look at the TPA, traditional public administration, it is largely considered a paradigm. Why? Because Wilson came up with the essay, right? There was a background, problems, corruption, etc. He provided certain solutions, which were, some pillars were laid, which were agreed: scientific orientation, comparative study, business like dichotomy, etc., etc. They were all agreed, and therefore we can say that the TPA was a somewhat a paradigm. Okay? Though this paradigm was later criticized for ineffectiveness, unresponsiveness, for not being result oriented. Okay? As Osborne and Gabler themselves, say that the TPA was indeed a paradigm, but it was concerned with wrong problems. It was concerned with wrong problems, trying to control everything. And it made us trained in a manner that we were dictating how things should be done, how the control should be there, what will be the inputs, that we completely ignored the outcomes. That is what is being criticized as the nature of TPA being mechanistic in nature. Right? Hence, the problems remained the same, but a new way to deal with them, to solve them, was thought about. And that is where NPM comes into the picture as a new paradigm. Why? Because it is again in an unconventional way, not in the mechanistic scientific manner, but in an unconventional way. It is also a set of tactics which are employed to address those very problems that were there. Imagine the problems behind, in the background of which Wilson started working. And now imagine the problems in which NPM is there. Same thing, corruption, inefficiency in the government, all those same things are there, right? So NPM also comes up with a collection of tactics, strategies, how to enhance the performance. Therefore, it is a paradigm. However, the literature review, if you consider regarding the various studies that have been done in and around NPM, there is no unanimity. And that is in fact the character of NPM. That unlike a unanimous set of principles, in the case of TPA, which made it a paradigm, the non-unanimity has been agreed by everybody. So there is unanimity that there cannot be a unanimity. And therefore it is a paradigm. If you reverse this, you will say it is not a paradigm, depending upon how the question comes. Okay. So at an epistemological level, we can say it is considered a paradigm because it proposes certain set of values, norms. Whereas the exemplars that we were looking at in TPA, the thought and the proof, that might be absent in NPM. But that nature of NPM has already been agreed amongst the scholar. Okay, so this perspective is there, but like I said, there will always remain a sort of a skepticism whether NPM is truly a paradigm or not. Okay, so that is something to note. So, but in a nutshell, we can say that irrespective of the fact whether it is a paradigm or not, it has significantly impacted the administrative system. Also, it has provided a framework for discourse on the reform. You see, the entire idea of reform actually comes up with NPM in a big way. So that is the grand contribution of NPM, both at the institutional level as well as at the administrative level. Okay, so that is there. It has resulted in several practical manifestation of administrative reforms across the globe, whether you take the example of India, Africa, New Zealand, United States, especially the OECD countries. Okay, so that is there. So with this, let us end today's session. We'll be dwelling on more perspectives on NPM and then get into the postmodern and other aspects. Okay, and quickly wind that up because the distribution that has been given to you is of 23 classes. Remember, in the first class we'll talk about ARC as well. Okay, so we'll quickly move gears, and like I said, I promised that there will be more than what has been promised in the session breakup. So today we learned postmodernism. Okay, so with this, let's end today's session. But before we go, let me ask friends watching us online that if there are any queries they would like me to address. Any queries, friends? Others? Divyanshi? Great, you are getting how to interlink. You guys here, I mean, you're getting the stuff, or is it too heavy, or should I tone it down? ठीक है?
So certain pockets are missing, so small, so revise नहीं किया.
रिवाइज नहीं किया ना, तो वो तो रिवीजन तो करना पड़ेगा. बट द पॉइंट इज यू विल बी एबल टू बेटर प्रेजेंट योरसेल्फ इन द एग्जामिनेशन, because that purveyed perspective has to be brought out. हाँ भाई.
The theoretical knowledge, but the linking what you are providing is more helpful in writing answers.
Right, it will help you in writing answers. The theoretical knowledge is there. I mean, you all know what is NPM.
Questions are coming to vague.
Questions are like that. You cannot really help it. That is how it is. हाँ भाई, आ रहा समझ? ठीक है. Divyanshi, you are there or not? Alright, I presume you are there and you are understanding. Just in case it's otherwise, connect with me. Alright, thank you friends.